Andrew Tate Golden Visas and the Oscars. I'll be discussing all that with Geoff Shullenberger and Ashley Frawley. I'm Matthew Schmitz, and this is the Compact Podcast. In 2015, a candidate for the Republican presidential nomination said, "They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people." He vowed to keep the bad people out of the country. He won the nomination and the presidency. His name was Donald Trump, and his administration has just arranged for the arrival of the Tate brothers in the United States. The Tate brothers are presented in some quarters as persecuted political dissidents for their based and red-pilled views, and are viewed by many others in the terms in which they present themselves as pimps, people who traffic in women, pornographers. I just couldn't help but think of Trump's promise to keep undesirable and criminal elements out of the country, and now it seems he's facilitating their arrival. Help me make sense of this, Ashley. How can I keep faith in the MAGA vision of high border walls when we're deliberately importing the most undesirable elements of the kind of global internet?
Yeah, I mean, the end of that was, and some I assume are good people, and that's the part that's missing here because I don't. It's pretty hard to say that these are even good people. Yeah, and in addition, didn't he convert to Islam? So that
The Muslim ban, right? Do you remember the Muslim ban?
right.
I don't know.
So he wouldn't even be allowed under previous promises of Trump. So yeah, I mean, Tate is such a ridiculous figure, and he really speaks to this whole idea of like, everything I do is for the clout, right? And now that's a political project. Everything you do is for the clout, political clout. Okay, that's where we are now. But generally in our culture, the thing that I find very annoying is just because something is bad doesn't mean that the opposite of it is good. And that seems to be the trajectory that we're on. So what is the stupidest political thing out there? Okay, all this silly like wokeness and the genderbread man and all that, the gender unicorn. And it's just the most ridiculous, stupid movement. And how do we counter that? Let's counter it with the most ridiculous, stupid movement. It's I'm sorry, but it's just, I find Tate to be such an obnoxious figure. It's hard for me to kind of speak clearly about this, but it's sort of taking at face value everything that wokeness seemed to be and then moving to the exact opposite. So wokeness appeared to be highly feminized, but of course it was actually highly misogynistic. It's a very basic and obvious thing to say, but the statement that women are wonderful is actually a misogynistic statement because it assumes that there is this like monolithic thing called women, and it's usually a bunch of stereotypes about women as being like close to nature and highly emotional, and actually, ladies, that's great. You should celebrate that. That's highly misogynistic. So then you take the opposite of that. Well, let's have manly men. Let's have men that are, not even very good at kickboxing or whatever the hell he does. That's the opposite. Everyone goes, yeah, let's have that. Not realizing that is also a really stupid and misandrous kind of stereotype, because all of this denies what people actually are, which is that some people might embody gender stereotypes in their lives when it suits them. So a confident man is more likely to get a woman. and a woman who, I don't know, wears dresses or whatever might, that might further her interest in some ways. But in most people's lives, there's an active negotiation of how they actually live. And instead, we're just like living in our public life in this stupid world of stereotype. And you actually see it filter down into the ways that we feel like we have to behave, and it actually stops people from reflecting. I mean, like, on the other side of this, the trans movement had this very stupid stereotyping going on where it was like, are you a boy who likes dresses? Well, you might actually be a girl, because what kind of boy likes dresses, you pansy? Like, and then it's on the other side. The other side of this is like, well, yeah, then I'll be a hyper masculine man, and that's great, let's promote that. And they don't realize how how similar they are, and how much they are simply repeating what is, I think, and expressing all of this, expressing a deeper death of liberalism, this sort of anti-liberalism that's made its way across the political spectrum. And so they think that they're like sticking it to the libs, but the libs were never, they had given up on liberalism a long time ago. So now we have this sort of anti-universal particularism, which we had in wokeness, but on the right. This is not an improvement. Andrew Tate is identity politics for men. That's what it is. It's, I mean, can we please get out of the, I don't, oh, I'm trying to avoid cliche here, but I'm like, let me off this stupid timeline, let me out of this ridiculous political mess. Are we incapable of thinking of nuance? Is that what's happened?
I would also situate this in a broader tendency that I've pointed to in other regards, which is that, various forms of cancellation, persecution, et cetera, that have been, clearly happening over the past decade or decade and a half, where you have figures who are, where the state is weaponized against them in some way on political grounds, or where they are, banned from certain platforms, debanked, all these kinds of things. What I pointed out in a previous conversation, I believe, was the way that this discussion of debanking has been shifted, so that basically, whereas originally what this referred to was, people who were involved in some kind of political protest, losing access, or who were, aligned with some kind of political movement or cause, losing access to their bank accounts, right? And this is clearly a kind of novel means of exercising state power indirectly through, sort of private means. And, we saw examples of this, but, what you've seen is this has sort of been shifted where, now, like, if you're a sort of crypto scammer, basically, and, the Bank of America won't give you a bank account because they suspect you might be engaged in criminal activity of like ripping people off with meme coins or something, then then what we see in the sort of in some areas of the current Trump administration is the idea that this too is political persecution. And so it's this interesting slippage where all kinds of figures, as long as they're kind of coded politically in the right direction, are given a certain pass, or a certain presumption of innocence, simply on the grounds that they're that they've fallen victim to something that vaguely looks like these sorts of targeted persecution or cancellation that we've seen in other contexts. And so I think the Tate instance is interesting here because basically, you have like people who are sort of vaguely in the same orbit as him, who were, maybe unjustly persecuted or had the state weaponized against them in some way or another. And so therefore it's assumed that, from within this realm. And I mean, it's interesting to note here that I actually haven't seen that many people in the sort of right wing, Twitter sphere defending Tate. And I mean, maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, but I don't even see that much of an upwelling of like support for him as some kind of victim. But
Well,
maybe
yeah.
I'm just
So
not
I mean,
looking.
right. Romania has a judicial process that's been playing out with Tate. There have been setbacks procedurally, uh, and obviously, due process matters a great deal. You can't just say he's a bad guy. We don't like him. We don't like the way he treats women, and throw him in jail. So that process has to play out. Uh, and I fully support that. What I don't, I've called him a criminal on Twitter, but he hasn't been convicted, but he, has engaged in acts that are, should probably, be criminal. But sorry, I'm not the biggest fan of online pornography and kind of supporting women into it. But what I don't get is this highly selective Emma Lazarus mentality. Bring me your poor, tired, huddled masses only for kind of base right wing influencers. I mean, the whole MAGA movement was sort of premised on the idea that we don't have an obligation to bring in everyone from all across the world on some strained humanitarian justification. And you saw how liberal policymakers uh, were to transform the US immigration system by saying things like, if you're a woman in a Latin American country, because of gender attitudes there and the oppressive reign of machismo, you have a presumptive kind of asylum claim in the United States. And this is something that the right rejected, and I think that rejection was in line with U.S. interests and with having a regular and orderly immigration process. What I didn't anticipate was that the right would end up creating its own version of this argument for men who are just facing the longhouse. But it's not. I don't see why it is the responsibility of Americans to bring in every guy who has been perhaps for some faintly political reason been called on his gross and wicked acts somewhere in the world. It's just why does that have to become a cause celeb here in the US? Why do we have to bring in these poor, tired, huddled masses of YouTubers and Rumble streamers or whatever? I don't get it.
Well, I think what happened was and I warned about this. I'm just saying, I did write about this. I said, when you cancel people, you create heroes. And I waxed Foucault on it, as I do. But everybody remembers the famous parts of Foucault about the fact that public executions can accidentally work against the sovereign. The idea is, don't do what this person has done. That could be you up there. That could be you on the stage. And we're all thinking, uh-oh, that could be me. So you identify with this person on the chopping block. And so that's what happens, is that the crowds, they feel it. They say, oh gosh, that could be me. So you identify with the hero. And people would go and they would go to public execution specifically to listen. Well, they're going to say the unsayable, right? The person's got nothing to lose. So when they're standing up there, they just, like slag off the king, all sorts of things. And actually, do you know, there's a case from 1705, a guy called Half-Hanged Smith or something like that, Half-Hanged John. Does anybody know the story where he survived a hanging?
No,
And
no.
yeah, and so he survives a hanging. The crowd, after he's hanging there for 15 minutes, the crowd starts cheering to get him down, and he actually gets a pardon. And then after that, he offends like 3 more times. But this it reminds me of Andrew Tate, right? So like he like thrives off of this, and like he became a kind of a folk hero, Half-Hanged Smith. We still remember him, this guy who robbed houses and was otherwise totally unworthy of note, 300 years ago or whatever it was. We still remember him. So this is what happened. When you cancel people, you create heroes. And that is why you shouldn't cancel people. That's why it was all a
Yeah,
mistake.
yeah.
And I'm afraid, you wet woke people, you created Andrew Tate. We all know that. And now you have to deal with the fruits of what is it? the fruits of what you've sown. I don't know, but you have to deal with it because this is your fault, I'm afraid.
Now, Compact has written on the cancellation of the election results in Romania, where Andrew Tate was being prosecuted. And now the kind of right populist candidate in Romania has been arrested on his way to register as a candidate in the upcoming election. He's been arrested for offenses against the, among other things, kind of a threat to the constitutional system. So there are really profound problems with the legal order, in Romania, in Europe more generally. That's something that we have called and will continue to call attention to. Uh, but supposing these things oblige us to accept the Andrew Tates of the world, I don't think so. It really is open borders week for the Trump administration. In addition to the kind of humanitarian dissident status apparently granted to Andrew Tate, Trump has floated a golden visa plan, which would allow people to buy their way into the country, get a visa for about $5 million. Details are vague. Maybe the figure will change, and that would put them on the path to citizenship. The idea is, if you invest in this country, you're bringing something to the table. These are high net worth individuals, highly valuable. We want to recruit them. We want to bring them in. You guys more optimistic about this move?
I mean, for all the blaming of the left for wanting a borderless world, I mean, the rich already live in a borderless world. That's kind of an obvious thing to say. But in terms of how much investment this actually brings, it's debatable. I mean, there's studies that show that that people don't actually invest in the areas that they come to. But also, I think Trump's going to realize very, very quickly what the rest of the world took decades to realize, which is that they live in the world that other people want. Now, obviously, you don't want the riffraff of other countries. You don't want poor people coming from poor countries. They don't want that. Nobody wants that. Okay. Nobody wants to have to deal with the social problems of other countries. We want other countries to deal with our social problems, our military interventions, the consequences of foreign policy. That should all be kept nicely at bay. But the rich want to move around. They want to move around. They want to get in and out, and they do. They get in and out of countries as they please. The laws don't apply to them, and nobody claims that they should. But when you raise people's aspirations, you create a desire for people to have what you have. And I don't know if you saw this, but did you see the video Trump Gaza? The absolutely insane AI video. I found that absolutely fascinating.
Insane or beautiful and inspiring?
Well, in a way, beautiful and inspiring.
Bearded, transgender kind of bikini clad people dancing on a beach while Trump and Netanyahu drink Mai Tais in their swim trunks.
So that's it was just so interesting to me how much they believe that money, there's money raining down from the sky.
Right,
money can do absolutely everything. It gives them godlike powers. And they realize, they live in the world. They live at the edge of possibility for all of us. I've quoted this before, but and I'll not quote it again. I'll just say my own words. But the rich people live they represent what is possible for all of humanity. And it's very interesting to me that they imagine themselves that they could just wave their hand and get rid of all poverty, get rid of all war. I mean, it really is delusions of being like a god, but they are kind of, in a way. I mean, they can't do it. They can't, but they are able to reach for and imagine a situation in which they could just wave their hand and bring prosperity. I think it's actually an incredible, totally loopy fever dream, but it's amazing to me that they are able to do that. And what they're going to realize is what I was getting at before. What they're going to realize is what it took the rest of, our global governance like 50 years to realize, that when you give people higher expectations for their lives, it is extremely destabilizing. It doesn't actually bring peace. I mean, it should do. And I personally think that in the long run, if we are able to bring like global wealth, if we are able to raise global wealth, raise people's expectations, it would make for a better world. But if you have global inequalities, what happens is if you have like consumerism and products coming in and you have television, that sort of thing, the liberals lament this and say money doesn't buy happiness and so on. Well, why? And when I say liberals, I don't mean like actual liberals. But why do they say that? Because they know that when people have higher expectations for their lives, they try to come over, they try to go to the US, they try to go to Europe, they will not accept the way things are, and they will become increasingly angry and dissatisfied. And this can lead to global conflict. And people can start to say, well, look, your country's getting rich off of our raw materials. Your country's getting rich off of our hard work on the backs of our backbreaking labor. So people are going to want that. So I could just sort of bring that all together. I think it's actually really amazing that I think they represent and are expressing in the most weird, feverish way, actually what is a possibility for the rest of us, that such enormous wealth opens up the possibility for peace and prosperity. But because they are, they live in a real world of capitalism and so on, and global inequalities, if they raise people's expectations, they're going to want to move around. They're going to want golden visas. They're going to want to have good lives. And eventually he will realize why global politics took the path that it did, which was to try to get people to stay where they are, be happy with less, and not to have raised expectations for what is possible.
One thing that's interesting about these golden visas is that we have some experience with it. In other jurisdictions, Europe has offered golden visas for years. Countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece have found in them a way to bring money in and help address their own budget problems. It's really these kind of eurozone fringe countries. The pigs or the sort of southern eurozone has been bringing in these golden visas, but many of these countries are now moving away from them. So Spain stopped offering new golden visas in April. Ireland closed its program in 2023, and Greece and Portugal have also modified their programs. This has been in response to local dissatisfaction with the program. So these things do have downsides. What are the downsides? Well, people who are wealthy come in, buy homes in the country. They don't take up residence in the homes, but this is just the easiest way to invest that cash. They don't take up residence there, so the home is unoccupied. It becomes an Airbnb. There are problems associated with that. It drives up housing costs, and I remember at times there have been complaints about empty apartment buildings, whether it's in London or in New York, with these residences owned by people who live elsewhere. The infamous Russian oligarchs. It's fascinating. It used to just be the Russians that were oligarchs and the Americans were philanthropists. Now it's Russians who are oligarchs and right-aligned Americans who are oligarchs. But left-aligned Americans are still philanthropists. So we'll see. We'll finally achieve a good politics when we recognize they're all oligarchs, but we're still working on that. So there are real downsides. And then I would also say there's this question about what the purpose of a nation is and what value wealthy people bring to a nation. Is it just this amount of cash, or is the real value finding some way? You'd find this in a kind of more classical account of politics. Is it finding some way to bind an elite to a political community and make them feel that their own good is somehow tied to the good of that broader community? If you want something like that, then you don't want to encourage this kind of citizenship arbitrage or this hedging between countries. You want people who are in or out, who have citizenship in your country or don't. You don't want to promote the idea that the United States is one option that people can have among several. And we have really moved away from the idea that there is something exclusive in citizenship, for elites, with dual citizenship, which has vastly expanded and was once a concept really anathema to you know just broad understandings of what it meant to be a U.S. citizen. Uh, Obviously, everyone has multiple identities, especially in the United States, where uh, you're there's not one kind of unified nation, tracing its lineage, from the Gauls or whatever in France, or there's a considerably weaker ideology of that. So you have multiple identities, but only one citizenship, and I think there is a lot to that. And with this golden visa plan, I think it really uh, strikes at what a movement like MAGA ought to be doing. It ought to be promoting an elite that is tied to this country and is not performing a kind of global visa arbitrage.
I mean, there's something quite disturbing about this idea that you can sort of purchase citizenship, which is supposed to be this foundational concept of democracy. But I've sat through so many debates on immigration, and so many people complaining about how nobody wants to integrate, but we're all speaking English and we're sitting in a non-English speaking country with zero intention of learning. I live in Greece and my Greek is crap. I mean, I've been speaking it for 20 years and I just turned on Duolingo and I was like, wow, there's a whole area of grammar I didn't even know about. Uh, I'm just as bad for this. So elites are global, and yet they seem to be so committed to this fantasy of remaining national and having some kind of national identity. And I don't know what the answer to that is, why there is this kind of paradox there. But it seems like they're trying to dig their heels in against something that is inevitably changing. I suppose one argument always for open borders, to the extent nobody makes this argument, obviously, but back in the day when people did, like the most radical Trotskyites used to make this argument for open borders. One of them was that actually most people, they are coming and going now. You don't have like a people going and they put down roots and like they did leaving Ireland in the 1830s or whatever, and that kiss their family goodbye and never see them again. Now you come and go, and that would actually be very helpful because most people don't want to go. They want to go for seasonal labor and then they want to go back to their families. But if it's so hard to get in and out, you go and you stay and you hide, you do whatever you have to do. And so I don't know. There's this. It's like the poor man's version of or this, at least open borders, like a poor man's version of this idea of how the rich live, which is to come and go as they please. Which there are arguments to say that that's not actually a bad thing, and it is kind of where things have been going for a long time.
Yeah, that's a powerful argument, but one that runs counter to my own intuition, which is that the difficulty we face right now is, uh, creating a home. It's easier to come and go than it is to actually have a place
Oh, I
to
know. I know. I'm split on
come
this too.
to come from or to go to. So
But like the
that's
thing is, like all that is solid melts into air, right? This is, I want to have a home. This is the last line of Marshall Berman's "All that is solid melts into air." He says, like, we're all trying to like build homes, and they just keep getting washed away, and we just keep building homes on this sand that keeps washing away. I mean, we all want it, right? But saying it doesn't make it so.
yeah. I won't wax too Augustinian about how our desire for an earthly home points us to our fundamental need for the heavenly home, the only lasting one. But another element of these debates about golden visas and the kind of notion of citizenship that I think that they play into, which is that it can be plural and that's the most advantageous thing, does create a problem for a place like the United States, where many of the people don't have access to dual citizenship. So if you have a legal regime where people who have recently arrived in the country have plural citizenships. Perhaps they're also favored by affirmative action laws that were created to address historic injustices suffered by enslaved African Americans. And then you have a guy in Appalachia who checks American on his census form. There are certain people who identify, what's your ethnicity? They don't say English or German or Hispanic; they just say American. That guy has really fewer legal rights and advantages than, say, your underrepresented minority golden visa holder, and that's something that fuels populist anger.
Well, it's interesting in relation to the H-1B visa debate, which we covered extensively, because it sort of pits these two, it would be a juxtaposition of these two kind of classes of people who, at least some people in the current ruling coalition, want to be highly mobile and want to facilitate their mobility. And in the case of the H-1Bs, it's really about, ensuring that you have a flexibilized workforce in certain industries that you can, essentially, easily replace workers, and that you can, have access to the largest possible supply of labor, so as to drive down the cost, and also to have a workforce that is easily disciplined. And so you have that kind of priority, which is clearly the agenda of certain people in the tech industry who are now in the sort of White House Mar-a-Lago orbit. And then this other type of visa that's being outlined here is essentially trying to, it's pitched as another revenue source. So it is, I suppose, in one way aligned with the long time MAGA idea that you can make other people pay for stuff. In other words, we don't want to tax our own citizens. Instead, we're going to make foreigners pay. So this, somewhat strangely and misleadingly, is often how Trump frames tariffs, where he essentially claims that what tariffs do is make other countries pay America, which isn't really quite how they work, but you can see the logic of it. And similarly here, there's kind of an idea of a sort of tribute that's being extracted. And so it is a certain, it reflects a certain imperial vision, where you can, essentially use America's clout to draw in the wealthy from around the world and force them to, to offer some kind of tribute to the imperial center in order to, have some sort of access to it. And so it does, I think it does reflect, on one hand, this kind of, it's a little bit different than the H-1B one, where you really had an illustration of the persistence of a certain kind of globalism within this coalition, where really, there are certain subsets of the workforce where you really still just have the drive to keep them as flexibilized as possible by expanding the labor supply, increasing competition, strengthening discipline. In this case, it, I think, could be connected to this kind of broader resurgence of a sort of older imperial, kind of pre-globalist imperial ideal, where really the idea is that you're trying to attract these, sort of mandarins from around the world and get them to pay some sort of tribute in order to have access to the imperial center. And so so it does reflect, on one hand, this idea of like, and I think a lot of what's going on right now is they want to do these tax cuts, they want to extend these tax cuts, and so they're trying to come up with other revenue. They're trying to slash various budgets, which overall is not really adding up to very much so far. but then they're also trying to find new revenue sources that they can claim will offset this. And so, it's partly that, and it's in line with this like making other people pay. And then it I think has this kind of, different sort of non-globalist American imperialist ethos behind it, perhaps.
And perhaps destined to be the source of some kind of controversy in a few years' time when there's like another 9/11 event and they're like, oh, how do these people, oh, they paid for a visa. Just what
Right.
happened with the with 9/11, if anybody remembers.
Yeah, the Bin Laden family would have been ideal golden
Yeah.
visa recipients.
Well, let's do a deal.
Now we need to talk about the issues that really matter, like the Oscars. Still a useful way of gauging, the state of American culture, what Hollywood cares about. Geoff, you've been following all this more closely than I have been. I've seen maybe one or two of the Oscar contenders. What are the interesting stories leading into the event?
Well, we talked about the Super Bowl in terms of, the vibe shift and the kind of post-woke turn of the culture. The Oscars seem like it seems like a weird year. There are none that there are some that are truly strange to have. I was shocked that The Substance, which, as a connoisseur of body horror, I enjoyed specifically for its body horror effects and for how far it went with this, incredibly icky concept. But in terms of its plot and kind of conception on the level of ideas, it's an incredibly crude and silly kind of feminist allegory that's, really like sort of Naomi Wolf beauty myth kind of, sort of 90s feminism, and just seemed incredibly dated. And I find it very strange that it's sort of pre-Me Too, it's like a sort of archaic feminism. I don't even know how it got made in the current year, but so that, that's maybe one case where I'm just like, I don't know, given all the sort of Me Too convulsions of Hollywood and so on, I find it weird that film is sort of in there as the representative of some kind of feminist messaging. That I suppose Anora would be another one where, it's I think as a film that was perhaps the most interesting and successful.
And for those of us who haven't seen it, what is Anora about?
So Anora is a kind of it's a very jittery sort of verite kind of production. Somewhat, it's been compared a lot to Uncut Gems. That's about a young stripper and sort of sex worker, prostitute, basically working at a Manhattan nightclub, who gets picked up and she's a Russian American from Brooklyn, gets picked up by a young Russian guy who wants somebody who can speak Russian, who turns out to be the scion of some sort of oligarchic family. And they have a whirlwind sort of romance and end up getting married in Las Vegas. And then his parents get wind of it and it all kind of unravels. And so it's an enjoyable kind of experience as a film. It feels very kind of indie and has a kind of low budget feel, but I thought it was pretty well done for what it was. So I don't know. Both of those have a kind of feminist aspect, but not in a sort of, not in the way. The Substance is just weird because its messaging seems so dated. Anora is kind of low key. It's low key kind of empowered sex worker stuff, which but not not particularly messagey. So. But looking through the politics of the list, the ones that really strike me, and I'm just talking about Best Picture here, are The Brutalist and Emilia Perez. So Emilia Perez is an extremely strange film. I haven't quite seen anybody seem to appreciate like how bizarre it is. It's a sort of campy musical that I'd say if it were actually a Mexican film, weirdly it's set in Mexico largely, but is made by a French director and French filmmakers, and has a mostly non-Mexican cast, which has made Mexican audiences unhappy. Because it's, I think, seen by Mexicans as sort of a somewhat stereotyped, kind of it's clearly drawing on the kind of narco genre, because it's basically the plot in simple terms is that there's a narco cartel boss who decides to have a sex change operation and take on a new identity as a woman, and is helped in this by a young attorney who played by Zoe Saldana, who gets very wealthy, from the work she does for this narco boss, who undergoes this sex change and reappears in a new identity. And the whole thing is it's music. It's a musical, so there are musical numbers throughout this whole process. It's so it's kind of a bizarre, like, telenovela, kind of Mexican telenovela type plot. It does have a kind of somewhat woke overlay in terms of how the gender stuff is. My understanding is the original conception was that the sex change would just be a kind of identity change. It would be a way of escaping the feds or his narco cartel rivals by assuming a completely unrecognizable identity. But then it's kind of given this like gender identity narrative overlay, which apparently was added on later in the process of the film. But the basic plot is this kind of lurid narco novella type story. It's extremely, it's sort of garish and bizarre and campy. And in any case, it's funny because I think it was seen as it was going to be, I suppose, the kind of politically progressive choice, in part because the actor who plays the narco, the transition narco boss, was assumed by many to be the first trans Best Actress nominee, but all of the or was nominated and was assumed to win. But then it was revealed that this actress, Carla Gascon is her name, had done quite a bit of problematic posting over the years, and had basically made lots of anti-immigrant Twitter posts, had said Islam was quote a hotbed of infection for humanity, had said some negative things about George Floyd and criticized Black Lives Matter.
That's the most progressive thing I could possibly imagine. A trans person with a huge range of backward opinions. That's great. A full human.
Well, this is like,
look at that.
We'll see.
Sorry, Jeff. I tuned out for a second. Are you talking about some trans Oscar nominee, or are you talking about a Doge employee?
Well, exactly. So, I mean, this is. I want to culminate this by suggesting that somebody needs to tell Donald Trump that this beautiful, glamorous Spanish actress was denied an Oscar because of these posts, and hopefully this will score an invitation to Mar-a-Lago, perhaps a free golden visa, and I think. Possibly a kind of role as maybe like global ambassador to the trans community or something. So I think this this could be the next Andrew Tate sort of in terms of the expanding MAGA coalition. Like Carla Gascon needs to be invited to Mar-a-Lago because Donald Trump needs to be informed that this person was cruelly denied an Oscar on the basis of these online posts. And so, you know, this would be the real vibe shift moment, if not for Amelia Perez to win or for Gascon to win, but for this travesty of being denied this Oscar, which everybody assumed Gascon would get, will lead to Gascon becoming a sort of fixture in the MAGA orbit. That is my fond hope.
It really is the kind of culture war collapsing in on itself, where you have the person kind of pushed to the forefront as this rebuke to backward America. We're gonna get a trans actress. We're so progressive. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah! And then, racist right-wing posts. Is there any space left in Trump's garden of American heroes, where he was planning on erecting statues? I mean, maybe this trans woman isn't an American yet, but there's always the golden visa. And, we'll get the statue up.
Yeah.
You had some thoughts about The Brutalist, which I saw you post and made me laugh so hard. So please, I'm dying to hear your appraisal.
It's weird. So when I went to see it, it's sort of, it's a 4-hour film. There's actually an intermission built into it. So it's very much selling itself as an epic production, in sort of grand style. Interestingly, and in terms of maybe these kind of weird cultural vibe shift aspects, it's apparently been, I believe the director has explicitly said that one of the inspirations for it was the film, I believe King Vidor's film of The Fountainhead, of Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, which also concerns an architect, as does The Brutalist. So there is kind of this attempt at it's the Citizen Kane or it's the epic American film. So, when I went to see it, I thought, it's visually striking in some ways. I found the experience pretty compelling. But as I've sat with it, I've come to find it like a pretty despicable production in a lot of ways. First of all, I find this kind of weird. There's some way in which it's like a simulacrum of an epic film. Almost feels as if it's sort of there's some like AI aspect to it, where it's like if you were to, in a few years when AI video output gets more sophisticated, if you were to sort of just prompt it to produce like an epic film about, mid-century America and the immigrant experience based on, the life of an architect, with inspiration from, the Fountainhead, Citizen Kane, blah, blah, blah. Like maybe this is kind of what AI would produce. There's just something weirdly hollow and completely. There's also something kind of incoherent about it. Like it feels like it was made, and this is why I thought of AI. Actually, it feels like it was made by somebody who is like profoundly sort of culturally and historically illiterate. And I mean, there are many details that I could go into, but it feels just like somebody who doesn't. It's set in this mid-century kind of post-war boom period, and it feels like it's by somebody who like doesn't grasp and it is this like, I guess, millennial director, Brady Corbett, former child actor, who I don't know, may just be an ignoramus. I don't really understand it, but it's a very odd film that I think that there's something revealing about it because it has this kind of air of grandiosity, yet it's ultimately, and if you can also read I'm trying to remember who the critic was, but I believe there's a piece by an architecture critic just kind of detailing how it gets very fundamental. It's supposed to be about brutalism, but it seems to be made by somebody who doesn't really understand what brutalism was. Like the architecture that's supposed to exemplify brutalism that you see in the film is actually not really brutalist. So it's just like, there's just like basic sort of cultural and factual ignorance that permeates the film. It feels like it's kind of made based on like vague stereotypes of what things must have been like. And so it's like a historical epic by and for the historically illiterate. And it's strange because I think it, even though I sort of think there have been some interesting films in recent years, like the possibility of creating a kind of, like an Oscar, there's sort of like the ideal of the Oscar film, which is somehow sweeping and epic. And it somehow strives to embody that, but does so in a way that seems to reveal the impossibility of making such a film at this point in history. And so I think it's sort of a revealing instance in that. And then, I think like Honora and Emilia Perez are both in different, Honora is basically it's a familiar kind of indie type of movie that we've seen roughly since the 90s. It's not particularly novel or amazing, but it's fine at being that. So I would actually say Emilia Perez, despite being like very bad in some fundamental ways, is the most interesting, and also for the vibe shift reasons I mentioned, the most deserving of the Oscar. Although short of that, hopefully it will at least earn a golden visa for Carla Gascon and a future as a MAGA influencer.
I found your description of the Brutalist so interesting because you said air of grandiosity, compelling visually, striking in some ways, but the more you sit with it, the more you detest it. I mean, wow, what a great description of Brutalist architecture. In that way, perhaps the film did its job. Sleek, and attempting to say something profound, but failing in the end.
A very good movie is called Taken. I don't know if you've seen it. It came out many years ago. Liam Neeson, and it's about a woman. It's about a young girl being seized by sex traffickers and prostituted out. Just comes to mind. It's a movie that comes to mind as we bring in Andrew Tate. We're canceling all these visas for people like who've worked with the U.S. in Afghanistan, and the liberal media is complaining and saying, shouldn't we bring in these people? And the administration is saying, oh no, we're not bringing them in. We don't need to have these people. Maybe they're not vetted. We don't need them in our neighborhoods. So let's bring in Andrew Tate, baby. Let's bring him on in. Can we please bring in a kind of Liam Neeson type character too to take him out? But sorry, I can't let go of our first topic, so we should probably wrap up our podcast. Thanks, listeners. Thank you, Geoff Shullenberger and Ashley Frawley. Thanks as well to our producer, Stephen Adamato.